Welcome back, dreamers, to Bedtime Sleepy Historian, the channel where history drifts slowly, like a candle flame, into the quiet corners of night. Tonight, we step into the stone courtyards and dusty training fields of ancient Sparta, a land where every boy was raised for war and every girl was raised to hold a household strong enough to outlast it. Mothers in Sparta lived lives unlike any others in Greece, sending sons to the barracks at 7 years old, whispering blessings over shields, and reminding them, with voices steady and hearts breaking, to return with it, or on it. But these same women also raised daughters, teaching them strength of body and sharpness of mind, ensuring the household could survive while husbands and sons marched to battle. In their hands lay the balance between love and duty, tenderness and iron resolve. So lie back, and let us wander together through Spartan homes, where lullabies were lessons, where laughter mingled with discipline, and where the quiet resilience of mothers became the backbone of an empire. And if you find yourself soothed by these stories of the past, don't forget to subscribe, so that wherever you are listening from tonight, you'll always have a gentle history to guide you into sleep. The Hearth of Sparta. The houses of Sparta were not gilded like those of Athens, nor adorned with painted walls and ornate statues. They were simple, built of stone and timber, smelling of smoke, olive oil, and wool. But within their walls, mothers held dominion. A Spartan woman's voice did not carry meekness, it carried the weight of survival. Neaira, daughter of warriors and now mother of 2, stirred the embers of her hearth as dawn spilled its first gray light across the Taygetus mountains. Her son, little Lykomedes, slept in a corner wrapped in a wool cloak. He was 6, soon to be 7, and she knew that in a year's time, the state would take him from her arms and place him in the agōgē, the rigorous training system where Spartan boys learned to fight, endure, and obey. Her daughter, Damaris, sat cross-legged beside her, weaving reeds into a mat. The girl's arms were strong, her hair bound back tightly, her eyes steady. Neaira had taught her to run, to wrestle, and to sing hymns to Artemis, for Spartan daughters were not raised to be idle. They were the keepers of land, of hearth, of future generations. As Neaira laid bread on the coals, she thought of her own mother, who had once pressed a shield into her father's hands and whispered the words that every Spartan wife and mother knew. With it or on it. Return with honor or return in death. There was no other path. Yet even as she hardened her heart, Neaira's gaze lingered on Lykomedes, his small fist curled in sleep. How could she release him into a world of discipline and hunger? How could she steel herself to see him beaten, tested, forged into a soldier? Damaris looked up from her weaving. "Mother," she asked, "why must Lykomedes leave us?" Neaira's throat tightened. She fed the bread to the fire, watching it bubble and crisp before answering. "Because he is not only mine," she said slowly. "He belongs to Sparta. And Sparta needs him strong." The girl nodded solemnly, but her hands worked faster, weaving reed over reed, as if each strand bound her brother more tightly to the home he would soon leave. Outside, the village stirred, the sounds of boots, of shields clattering, of women's voices calling children awake. And Neaira, like every Spartan mother, drew a deep breath and whispered to her heart, "I will raise them not for myself, but for the city." The weight of shields. When the sun had climbed over the rooftops, Neaira carried Lykomedes outside to join the women gathered in the courtyard. They trained their sons' arms even before the state claimed them, and today would be no different. Though only 6, Lykomedes already bore a small wooden shield, its surface smoothed by his father's hands. The other mothers looked on with approving eyes. Spartan boys were not coddled, they were tested. If a child was weak, the whispers spread quickly, and weakness was not tolerated long in Sparta. Neaira's jaw tightened as she adjusted the strap on her son's shield. She would not allow anyone to say he was soft. "Hold it high," she told him. not against the earth, not dragging at your side. The shield is not only yours, it protects the man next to you. Forget that, and you fail them all. Lykomedes frowned with the seriousness of a boy who longed to please. He raised the shield, his small arm trembling, but he did not lower it. Damaris clapped her hands and shouted, "Higher, brother! Higher!" The other women chuckled, but their laughter was not unkind. They knew the pride of watching a son strain against the burden of his future. Neaira, standing tall, called across the courtyard, "Remember this, Lykomedes, your shield is your life, but more than that, it is the life of your kin. A warrior without it brings ruin to all." The boy's arms shook, his face reddened, and finally the shield slipped, clattering to the ground. Neaira bent, lifted it, and pressed it back into his hands. "Again," she said firmly. Tears welled in his eyes, but he nodded. He lifted it once more. In the shadows, Damaris whispered to herself, "With it or on it." The words sounded strange in her young mouth, but she felt them settle inside her like stone. That night, when the children slept, Neaira sat alone by the hearth, her husband's shield propped against the wall. She traced the bronze rim with her fingertips, remembering the day he had marched away with it, never to return. Her lips trembled, but no tears came. Spartan women were not taught to weep. They were taught to endure. And so she whispered the words into the empty night, words she would one day speak to her son. "With it or on it." Daughters of Sparta. Morning drills ended, and Lykomedes slumped against the doorway, exhausted but proud. Neaira let him rest, but her eyes soon turned to her daughter. Spartan sons were forged into warriors, but daughters were not spared the fire of discipline. They, too, carried the fate of the city. "Damaris," Neaira said, handing her a spear no longer than the girl's height, its tip dulled for practice. "Come! The field waits." The girl's brows furrowed. She was only 8, her body still small, yet her spirit burned bright. She grasped the shaft with both hands and followed her mother into the dusty courtyard where other girls gathered. Their mothers watched from the shade, nodding approvingly. Spartan daughters were trained to be strong, not to wield spears in battle, but to bear the weight of land and lineage. "Feet apart," Neaira instructed. "The spear is not for play. It teaches you balance. It teaches you strength." Damaris planted her feet and mimicked her mother's stance. Neaira guided her hands, then stepped back. "Strike forward. Not timidly. With force, as if an enemy comes for your home." The girl thrust, her small arms straining. Dust rose from the earth. Neaira nodded. Again. Soon, Damaris's breath came in gasps, her hair damp with sweat. But she did not complain. Her eyes burned with determination, and Neaira saw in her the reflection of countless Spartan women before her, daughters trained not for softness, but for resilience. One of the older women watching murmured, "The girls of other cities play with dolls. Our daughters play with destiny." When the lesson ended, Neaira gave her daughter a cup of watered wine. Damaris drank greedily, then looked at her mother. "Why must I learn this?" she asked. "I will not go to war." Neaira placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "No," she said quietly. "But when the men are gone, it is you who must hold the home. You who must manage the land, direct the helots, raise the next generation. Weakness in a woman destroys Sparta as surely as weakness in a man." Damaris nodded slowly, her young face solemn. She did not yet understand the full weight of her mother's words, but she felt their gravity settle in her bones. That evening, as the family gathered around their simple meal of barley bread and cheese, Lykomedes leaned against his sister and whispered, "When I am gone, you must guard our home." Damaris looked at him, her lips pressed into a line. She did not laugh, did not dismiss him. She only answered, I will. And Neaira, watching them both in the flicker of the firelight, prayed silently that the gods of Sparta would grant them strength enough for the burdens to come. The 7th year. The year passed quickly, as if the gods themselves hastened the march of time. Lykomedes grew taller, his legs lean from endless running games, his arms wiry from practice with the little shield. Neaira watched him change, less child, more boy, though still with the softness of youth in his cheeks. When the festival of Artemis Orthia approached, mothers across the city grew quiet. For every Spartan mother knew what followed, the choosing of boys for the agōgē. At 7 years old, sons were taken from their households and bound to the state. They would sleep in barracks, eat at communal messes, and be trained not only in combat but in silence, endurance, and obedience. On the morning of the festival, Neaira dressed Lykomedes in his cleanest tunic, one she had woven herself, its threads tight and sturdy. She smoothed his hair with olive oil, though her hands shook as she did it. Damaris stood nearby, clutching a reed basket filled with offerings, cakes shaped like animals, small garlands of wildflowers. "Mother," Lykomedes said, trying to sound bold though his voice quavered. "Will I be brave enough?" Neaira knelt, her hands firm on his small shoulders. She met his eyes, dark and wide like her own. "Bravery is not the absence of fear, my son," she said. "It is doing what must be done, even when fear gnaws at your heart. You will be brave because you must." Damaris swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to speak, to tell her brother to stay, to cling to his tunic and never let him go. But she said nothing. Spartan girls did not plead. They endured. At the temple of Artemis Orthia, the air thrummed with voices, drums, and the bleating of goats brought for sacrifice. Boys stood in a line, some trembling, some scowling with determination. Mothers lingered behind them, their faces masks of stone, though their hearts raged with a storm of love and fear. The magistrates moved down the line, calling names, noting each boy's frame, posture, and spirit. When they reached Lykomedes, Neaira held her breath. The magistrate grunted approvingly. "Strong shoulders. Good height. He will serve Sparta well." Lykomedes' chest swelled, but he did not look back at his mother. He knew better. He stood tall, gripping his little shield, though soon it would be replaced with iron and discipline harsher than any child could imagine. As the boys were led away, Neaira's lips parted, but no sound escaped. Only when Damaris slipped her hand into hers did she breathe again. The mothers turned, their steps slow, their faces composed. None wept in the open air, for tears were not for the streets of Sparta. That night, when the house was too quiet and the mat where Lykomedes had slept lay empty, Neaira pressed her face into her cloak and whispered into the darkness, "With it, or on it." Her daughter heard her and repeated it softly to herself, not fully understanding, but learning, always learning. The first night in the agōgē. Lykomedes' first night away from home was colder than any he had ever known. The barracks smelled of sweat, smoke, and rough wool. No hearth warmed the room, no soft voice told him to rest. The boys lay on mats stuffed with reeds, their heads bare against the chill. An older boy, already hardened by years in the agōgē, barked at them. "No whining. No shivering. The cold is your tutor, and you will learn its lessons." His eyes were sharp, and his hand carried a staff for striking. Lykomedes pulled his cloak tight around his shoulders, remembering his mother's words. Bravery is doing what must be done. Still, he longed for the smell of bread baking on the hearth, the soft hum of his sisters weaving songs. But he clenched his jaw and closed his eyes, determined not to let the tears spill. Back at home, Neaira sat by the empty mat where her son had once slept. The house seemed hollow without his restless movements, his constant questions, his boyish laughter. She had thought herself ready, had told herself that she was raising not a child but a warrior, but now the silence pressed on her chest like a stone. Damaris sat beside her, weaving a strip of cloth for the loom. Her hands moved steadily, though her face was pale. "Will he be hungry, mother?" she asked. Neaira hesitated. "Yes," she admitted. "The agōgē teaches hunger, for hunger sharpens the body and mind. He will learn to endure it." The girl's eyes lowered, her lips trembling before she forced them still. "And if he cannot endure it? Then he is not meant for Sparta," Neaira said, her voice firm, though her heart recoiled from the words. In the barracks, Lykomedes' stomach growled. The meager bread given to him had been hard, almost stone-like, and it barely dulled his hunger. He watched as one boy, bolder than the rest, crept toward the storeroom, seeking more. The older boy with the staff struck him across the shoulders before he could reach it. "Stealing is not forbidden," the older boy growled. "Being caught is forbidden." Lykomedes' eyes widened. He understood the lesson. Cunning was as valued as strength. He lay awake long into the night, hunger gnawing at him, fear prickling at his skin. Yet beneath it all, a strange fire flickered, the desire to prove himself worthy of his mother's words, worthy of Sparta's gaze. And as he drifted into uneasy sleep, Damaris whispered his name back at home, weaving his memory into the cloth as if each thread bound him safely to her hands. The lessons of hunger and strength. Days stretched into weeks, and Lykomedes began to understand the rhythm of the agōgē. He learned to rise before dawn, to march barefoot on rocky ground, to eat little and speak less. His body grew leaner, his eyes sharper, and though hunger clung to him like a shadow, he began to see it not as an enemy but as a companion. One morning, their instructor tossed a dead hare onto the dirt. "Eat," he commanded. The boys hesitated, staring at the animal's limp body. Lykomedes swallowed hard, then stepped forward. With trembling hands he skinned it as best he could, fumbling but refusing to falter. The others followed, tearing flesh with dirty fingers. When they ate, it was not with disgust, but with the hunger of wolves. Lykomedes licked the grease from his fingers and thought of his mother's bread. He felt a pang, but he did not let it soften him. She gave me to Sparta. I must not shame her gift. Back at home, Neaira's eyes were fixed on Damaris. Without her brother, the girl grew more serious, her playfulness tucked away like an old doll. Neaira taught her to run longer distances, to lift heavier jars of water from the Eurotas, to wield the practiced spear with sharper precision. "Why so much, mother?" Damaris asked one evening as sweat dripped from her brow. "I am only a girl." Neaira's gaze was steady. "You are not only a girl. You are the strength that will remain when your brother and the others march away. The land must be kept, the home guarded. When the helots rise, and they always rise, you must not tremble." Damaris nodded, her chest heaving. She no longer asked for gentleness. At night she dreamed of her brother among strange faces, sleeping on reeds, starving, but enduring. She whispered prayers to Artemis, not for his safety, for safety was not promised in Sparta, but for his strength, his cunning, his unbreakable will. In the barracks, Lykomedes learned silence. A wrong word earned a blow from the staff. He learned to take the strike without flinching, his jaw locked, his eyes forward. Each bruise became a mark of progress, each scar a page in the unwritten book of his training. And though the nights were bitter and the hunger endless, he began to feel something stir in him, a pride that he could withstand what others could not. A pride that one day, when he stood before his mother again, she would not see a boy but the beginnings of a warrior. The trial of endurance. The boys were led to the river before dawn, the sky still heavy with night. Their instructor's voice cut through the mist like a blade. "Into the water!" The Eurotas flowed swift and cold, biting the skin with winter's grip. Lykomedes waded in, his breath catching in his chest, his teeth clenching against the shock. Around him, boys shivered, some gasped, and one began to cry until a sharp blow silenced him. "Endure!" the instructor barked. "The enemy does not wait for warmth or comfort." Lykomedes forced himself deeper, the current tugging at his legs, his cloak heavy with water. His heart thundered. He thought of his mother's voice, calm but unyielding. "With it, or on it." He whispered the words in his mind like a charm, letting them burn hotter than the cold. Hours passed. By the time the boys were pulled from the river, their lips blue, their limbs trembling, Lykomedes could barely stand. Yet he held his ground, swaying but upright. When the instructor's eyes met his, a brief nod came, approval, rare and fleeting. Lykomedes felt a surge of pride that warmed him more than any fire. At home, Neaira and Damaris faced their own trial. The barley harvest was due, and the helots moved sluggishly in the fields. Neaira's voice carried across the rows, sharp and commanding, ensuring they worked. Damaris ran with a water jug, her small frame bearing more than her years. "Faster," her mother urged. "Strength comes from labor." The girl stumbled, then steadied herself, refusing to spill a drop. She knew the eyes of the helots were upon her, measuring whether weakness ran in her veins. She would not give them cause to doubt. That evening, as they rested in the dim light of the hearth, Neaira studied her daughter. The child's hands were blistered, her cheeks smudged with dust, yet her posture was proud. "You remind me of my mother," Neaira said softly. "She once told me, a Spartan woman is not only the root of the tree, but the stone that keeps it upright." Damaris tilted her head, thinking. "Then I will be a stone," she whispered. Neaira smiled faintly. "And your brother will be the branch that grows high. Together you are Sparta." Far away, Lykomedes lay on the reed mat, his body aching from the river's chill, his stomach gnawing with hunger. But in his dreams he saw his sister's face, steady as stone, and his mother's voice like iron in the air. And he knew, though they were apart, they endured the same trial. The test of cunning. The barracks whispered with hunger. Bread was scarce, meals meager, and the boys had learned the lesson their instructors repeated often. Stealing is not forbidden, only being caught is shameful. One night, as the others slept, Lykomedes crept from his mat. His ribs ached from hunger, his legs still sore from the river trial, but his eyes gleamed with determination. He had watched the older boys, noted where they slipped into the storeroom, how they carried their spoils hidden beneath their cloaks. Now it was his turn. The door creaked as he pushed it open, his breath shallow. He darted inside, fingers brushing over sacks of grain, dried figs, and strips of salted meat. His heart hammered. This food could be his salvation. He stuffed a handful of figs into his tunic and turned, only to hear footsteps. An older boy loomed in the doorway, staff in hand. Lykomedes froze, caught between terror and pride. If he admitted weakness, he would be beaten. If he lied poorly, he would be shamed. So he lifted his chin and said, "I was testing the lock. It was weak." The boy stared, then laughed, a rough, humorless sound. "Bold," he said. "Foolish, but bold. Hide it better next time." He let Lykomedes pass, though his eyes glinted with warning. That night, Lykomedes shared the figs with two younger boys who had wept silently from hunger. He gave himself only one, chewing slowly, the sweetness burning his tongue like sunlight. Pride swelled in him, not for feeding himself, but for proving he could outreach the system, even if only briefly. Back at home, Neaira dealt with her own test of cunning. A helot woman had hidden a portion of the barley harvest, tucking it beneath her cloak. Damaris was the first to see it, Her young hands trembled, but her voice rang out clear. "She steals from Sparta!" The helot froze, her eyes wide with fear. Neaira strode forward, her face hard as bronze. She did not beat the woman, that was for the overseers, but she made certain the theft was known. "Take from us, and you take from Sparta's children," she declared. That night Damaris asked, "Was I right to speak, mother?" Neaira laid a hand on her daughter's head. "Yes. Cunning can protect, but it can also destroy. Remember this, it is not only strength that preserves Sparta, it is vigilance." Damaris nodded, though her heart ached. She understood now that power was not only in spears and shields, but in watching, in speaking, in being heard. And as Lykomedes drifted into uneasy sleep, his stomach still hollow, he whispered to himself, "Cunning is strength as much as the spear." The lesson of humiliation. The boys stood in the training yard, lined up beneath the harsh Spartan sun. Their instructor paced before them, staff in hand, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Today," he announced, "you will learn what it means to bear shame." One by one, the boys were called forward. They were given impossible tasks, lifting stones too heavy, reciting laws they had not yet learned, holding their arms aloft until their muscles quivered and failed. Each boy faltered. Each boy was struck, jeered at, made to feel small. When it was Lykomedes' turn, he was told to carry a stone twice his size across the yard. He bent low, arms straining, veins burning, his breath ragged. The stone slipped, crashed to the ground, and dust rose in a choking cloud. Laughter erupted from the older boys. The instructor struck him across the shoulders. "Weak!" he barked. "Do you think Sparta thrives on excuses?" Lykomedes' face burned. For a heartbeat, shame flooded him. He wanted to cry, to flee, to bury his head beneath his cloak. But then he remembered his mother's words, whispered into his bones, "Bravery is doing what must be done." He rose, bent again, and though the stone would not move, he refused to leave it. His knees trembled, his back screamed, yet he clung to it, arms wrapped tight, until the instructor finally pulled him away. The laughter quieted. The instructor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Better to fall with struggle than stand without trying. Learn this well." That night, Lykomedes' shoulders throbbed, his pride wounded but not broken. He understood the lesson. A Spartan was not measured by victory alone, but by the will to endure shame without surrender. Far from the barracks, Damaris faced her own trial. She had been chosen to join the other girls at the sanctuary of Artemis. There, they danced barefoot upon the earth, their movements strong, not delicate, their voices lifted in hymns that praised not beauty but power. One of the elder women bound a crimson ribbon around Damaris's wrist. "This marks you as one who will carry Sparta forward," she intoned. "Through your body will flow the strength of warriors yet unborn. You are not for softness. You are for endurance." The words settled heavily on Damaris's shoulders. She looked at the ribbon, then at the faces of the other girls, some solemn, some fierce, and felt a strange fire ignite in her chest. She was not only her mother's daughter. She was Sparta's. That evening, as she sat weaving by the hearth, she whispered to herself the same vow her brother had made in the barracks: "I will endure." And though they were miles apart, the siblings carried the same flame, one forged through humiliation, the other through initiation. Blood at Artemis Orthia. Spring brought the festival of Artemis Orthia, and with it, the cruelest of Sparta's rites. Boys of the agōgē were led to the temple, their tunics stripped from their backs, their bodies bared to the crowd. Lykomedes stood among them, his stomach tight with dread. The air reeked of sweat and smoke from offerings. Mothers gathered at the front, their faces carved from stone, though every heart thudded with fear. Neaira was there, Damaris at her side, both silent. They had come not to shield him, but to watch. For in Sparta, watching was part of the test. The ritual began. Boys were whipped as they attempted to seize cheeses laid upon the altar. The lashes were not gentle. They tore flesh, drew blood, tested not only endurance but dignity. To flinch, to scream, was shameful. To endure was honor. Lykomedes' turn came. He rushed forward, hands outstretched for the cheese. A lash cracked across his shoulders, the pain searing, brighter than fire. His body wanted to crumple, but he gritted his teeth, forcing himself onward. Another lash fell, then another, and still he reached. His fingers brushed the cheese, slipped, tried again. The crowd roared. Some cheered, some jeered. Neaira's hands clenched at her sides, her nails biting her palms, but her face betrayed nothing. Damaris's eyes widened, her lips parting in a silent gasp, but she too held her silence. At last, Lykomedes seized the cheese, clutching it against his chest as blood trickled down his back. He staggered, but he did not fall. The lash descended once more, and this time he did not even flinch. The priestess of Artemis raised her hand. "He endures," she declared. The crowd's voices rose in a thunder of approval. Lykomedes stood, his chest heaving, sweat and blood mingling. In that moment, he was no longer simply a boy. He had entered the path of manhood, forged by pain and pride. When Neaira returned home, she washed her daughter's hands at the basin. Damaris's voice was small but steady. "Mother, he bled so much. Did it not wound your heart to see it?" Neaira paused, her eyes on the water rippling in the bowl. "My heart was wounded, yes. But a Spartan mother does not heal her children with softness. We harden them with our silence." Damaris lowered her gaze, her ribbon still tied at her wrist. She whispered, "Then I too must learn silence." Neaira touched her cheek, softer now. "Yes, child. Silence, but not weakness. Remember, to endure is not only to bear pain. It is to bear it with pride." In the barracks that night, Lykomedes lay on his reed mat, his back burning. Yet in his mind, he saw his mother's eyes, stern, unbroken, and his sister's ribbon, crimson as his blood. And he knew he had not suffered alone. He had suffered for Sparta, and they had witnessed it. Rising among the boys. Weeks passed after the festival of Artemis Orthia, and the wounds on Lykomedes' back hardened into scars. But the scars were more than pain, they were marks of honor. Among the boys of the agōgē, whispers spread, he did not cry. He did not fall. One evening, during training in the dusty yard, an older boy sneered at him. "You think yourself strong because you endured the whip?" His staff swung, cracking across Lykomedes' thigh. The blow stung, but Lykomedes did not stumble. He raised his small shield instead, deflecting the second strike. The watching boys shouted, some in encouragement, others in mockery. The instructor barked, "Good! Shields protect more than your body, they guard your honor. Never let either fall." From that day forward, Lykomedes felt a subtle shift. He was no longer the smallest boy clinging to courage. Others began to follow his lead, sharing scraps of food, copying his stance with the shield, even daring to speak when he did. The weight of expectation grew heavier, but it also gave him strength. Far away at the women's fields, Damaris prepared for her first contest. Spartan girls did not hide behind looms alone. They ran, wrestled, and hurled the discus, their bodies tested beneath the sun just as the boys were. Neaira watched from the sidelines, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. The contest began. Barefoot, Damaris sprinted across the packed earth, her legs pumping, her breath sharp. Dust rose around her as other girls pulled ahead, but she refused to falter. She remembered her mother's voice, Weakness in a woman destroys Sparta as surely as weakness in a man. When she stumbled on a stone, the crowd gasped. For a moment, shame threatened to drown her. But she clenched her fists, pushed harder, and finished the race with dust streaked across her knees and fire in her eyes. She did not win, but she did not yield. Later, during wrestling, another girl pinned her roughly, grinding her shoulder into the dirt. Pain shot through her, but Damaris twisted, rolled, and broke free. She fought until both were breathless, until the instructor raised her hand and said, "She does not surrender. She endures." That evening, Neaira braided her daughter's hair by the hearth. "You were not the fastest," she said softly, "but you were the fiercest." Damaris lifted her chin, pride flickering across her face. "Then I am my brother's sister," she declared. Neaira's hands paused in the braid. A faint smile touched her lips, though her eyes glimmered with something deeper, sorrow and pride interwoven. "Yes," she whispered. "You are." And somewhere across the city, Lykomedes lay awake, staring into the darkness, his body sore but his spirit rising. He did not know why, but he felt stronger, as if his sister's endurance had reached him through the night. The trials beyond the walls. The day came when Lykomedes and the other boys were led beyond the safety of Sparta's walls. Their instructor's voice rang harshly as they stood in the shadow of agōgē, the great mountain that loomed over their homeland. "You will eat what you find. You will sleep where the earth allows. Return not with excuses but with proof of your cunning." Each boy was given nothing but a cloak, a dagger, and the expectation that failure would be worse than death. Lykomedes' heart thudded, but he forced himself to stand tall, repeating to himself the words his mother had spoken when he was small: "Bravery is doing what must be done." The nights were bitter, the wind cutting through the thin wool of his cloak. Hunger gnawed at him like a wolf, and once, when he caught a rabbit with trembling hands, another boy longed to take it. They fought, rolling in the dirt, teeth bared. Lykomedes remembered the training yard, the sting of shame, and refused to let go. His knuckles split, blood smeared across his jaw, but in the end, the rabbit was his. He roasted it over a tiny fire, the smoke hidden beneath a rock's shelter, and ate in silence. Victory tasted of ash and pride. Back in the city, Damaris faced her own trial. She was nearly of age to be betrothed, and the women of the community had begun to watch her more closely. As she worked at the loom, one older woman leaned in and said with a sharp smile, "A strong runner, perhaps. But what will you do when the pains of childbirth tear at you? Running will not save you then." The words pierced deeper than any spear. Damaris pressed her lips together, her hands trembling on the wool threads. At night she asked her mother, "Is that all they see in me? A vessel for pain?" Neaira's gaze softened, though her back remained straight. "They are not wrong. But remember, childbirth is not weakness. It is war waged within the body. To survive it is as great a victory as any your brother will win with a spear." Damaris lay awake that night, staring at the flicker of the hearth fire. She thought of her brother, out in the wild, facing hunger and cold. She thought of her own body, strong yet destined for another kind of battle. And she realized both paths demanded the same vow: "I will endure." When Lykomedes stumbled back through the city gates days later, leaner, dirt-streaked, and hollow-eyed, Neaira met him at the threshold. She said nothing of his torn cloak or bruised hands. She only laid a hand upon his head and whispered, "You are coming closer to being a man." And when Damaris joined her at the fire, Neaira looked from son to daughter and thought, both will carry Sparta, though in different ways. Both will suffer, and both must endure. Blades and burdens. The clang of bronze filled the training yard as Lykomedes faced his first combat drill against boys older and larger than himself. Wooden swords were thrust into their hands, shields strapped across their arms. The instructor barked, "Today you do not spar, you fight. If you fall, you rise again. If you bleed, you learn." The older boy he faced, broad-shouldered, eyes hard with pride, charged without hesitation. The impact rattled Lykomedes' shield, jolting his arm numb. He staggered, nearly fell, but his memory sharpened, never let the shield drop. He braced, teeth clenched, and pushed back. The fight was clumsy, brutal, nothing like the neat drills. The wooden blade slammed against his thigh, his ribs, his shield. Pain blossomed in every strike. But Lykomedes learned to slip sideways, to twist his shield into the blow, to dart forward when his opponent grew reckless. At last, with a shout that scraped his throat raw, he drove his shield's rim into the boy's chest. The larger boy stumbled, hit the ground with a grunt. The instructor's eyes narrowed, then flicked in approval. "Not strength," he told the watching boys. "Endurance and cunning. Remember that." Lykomedes limped away from the field that night, battered but unbroken, and for the first time, the older boys clapped his shoulder instead of jeering. His scars were becoming his armor. Across the city, Damaris stood in the temple of Artemis, surrounded by women draped in crimson and white. The air smelled of oil and smoke, the chants echoing like a heartbeat. Tonight was a ritual for the women of Sparta, an offering for safe childbirth. Though Damaris was still too young for marriage, she was made to watch, to learn. At the center, a young woman labored, her cries sharp and unhidden. The priestess lifted her voice above them. "See, daughters of Sparta, the truest test of courage. Spears may kill quickly, but this is the long war." Damaris shivered as she watched, her fists clenched. The woman's body shook with pain, the chants rising with every contraction. Hours passed before a baby's cry split the air. Relief washed through the temple, but the mother lay pale, her chest heaving. She had survived, barely. That night Damaris whispered to her mother, "Is this the fate I must bear?" Neaira touched her cheek. "It is the fate of all Spartan women. But do not think it lesser than the battlefield. Each mother who survives brings forth warriors and daughters to keep Sparta alive." Damaris lay awake long after, the wail of the newborn echoing in her mind. Her brother fought bruises and broken bones. She would fight with her very life. And both battles demanded the same thing, unyielding endurance. The weight of command. The morning sun cast long shadows over the training yard as the boys of the agōgē gathered for their drills. This time, the instructor did not take his place before them. Instead, he turned to Lykomedes and said, "Today you lead." A ripple passed through the boys. Some smirked, others scowled, but all eyes fixed on him. Lykomedes felt the weight of their stares like a stone pressing into his chest. Leadership was not an honor, it was a trial. "Form ranks," he barked, his voice hoarse at first. When a boy hesitated, he struck his shield with his sword, the sound cracking like thunder. "Ranks! Shields up!" Slowly, awkwardly, they obeyed. He drilled them as he had been drilled, repeating commands until his throat ached. When they faltered, he drove them harder, not out of cruelty, but because he knew the punishment for weakness. At the end, when sweat streaked every brow and shields hung heavy on every arm, the instructor nodded once. "Better than I expected," he said. Then, to Lykomedes, "A leader does not need strength greater than all others, only the will to make others stronger." That night, as the boys shared their meager meal, one of the older ones muttered, "You fight like a wolf, small but relentless." The words were half an insult, half respect, but Lykomedes felt a flicker of pride. The pack was beginning to accept him. Meanwhile, in the women's quarter, Damaris's life pressed forward in quieter but heavier steps. Word had come of a betrothal arrangement. The man was older, a soldier who had proven himself in battle, and though his name was spoken with respect, Damaris felt her stomach twist each time her mother spoke of him. "I do not even know him," she whispered one evening, her voice breaking. Neaira's eyes softened, but her reply was unyielding. "You are not meant to know him as a lover, only as a husband. Marriage in Sparta is not for pleasure. It is for the survival of the state. You will bear children who will stand where he cannot, who will fight when he is gone." Tears burned in Damaris's eyes, but she swallowed them down. She thought of her brother with his shield, of his bruises and scars. She thought of the woman in the temple, pale but victorious. Perhaps her own war was already chosen for her. That night, beneath the same sky, Lykomedes and Damaris lay awake in their separate beds. He felt the first burden of command. She felt the weight of destiny pressing nearer. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but both knew it would demand more of them than they had yet given. The edge of trials. The boys gathered at dawn, the sky still bruised with night. Today was no ordinary drill. Today marked the final trial before they could be counted among the ranks of Spartan youth, no longer children but warriors in training. The instructor stood before them, eyes hard, voice like stone. "Tonight you go into the wild. You will steal your food. You will hide from the watchman. If you are caught, you will be beaten, not for stealing, but for failing to be cunning. A Spartan must live unseen when it is needed." Lykomedes' heart pounded. This was more than hunger or bruises. This was a test of skill and silence. He remembered his mother's words, and his father's ghost seemed to stand at his shoulder. "Do not return in shame." That night, cloak wrapped close, dagger hidden, he slipped into the darkness. The fields lay open beneath the moonlight, guarded by sharp-eyed men. Every rustle seemed a shout, every breath a betrayal. He crept low, body pressed to the earth, heart steady as a drum. At last he seized a chicken from a coop, silencing it swiftly with his hands. Victory felt cold in his palm. But as he returned, a shout split the night. Another boy had been caught, dragged forward, beaten until his cries echoed in the dark. Lykomedes clenched his teeth and slipped past unseen, the weight of silence heavier than any wound. By dawn, he returned, bloodied but triumphant, the chicken laid before the instructor. "You endure," the man said simply, and Lykomedes knew he had crossed the threshold. He was still a boy, but now a boy Sparta could call her own. Far from the wilds, Damaris stood at another threshold. Her betrothal drew near, and with it, a ritual of passage. She and the other young women bathed in the cool waters of the Eurotas River, their hair unbound, their bodies marked with oils and garlands. The priestess of Artemis raised her arms and declared, "From girls you pass into women, not for yourselves but for Sparta." Damaris felt the chill of the water sink into her bones. She thought of her mother's words, of the newborn's cry in the temple, of her brother training until his back was scarred. Her war would not be fought with daggers in the night, but it would demand the same courage. When she emerged from the river, her hair dripping, she stood taller, though fear still clung to her ribs. Neaira, watching from the shore, saw both son and daughter stepping into new battles. One would serve with shield and spear, the other with body and endurance, both bound to Sparta's harsh embrace. And in her heart, she prayed silently to Artemis, "Let them both endure. Let them both live long enough to see what they are becoming." Homecomings and first meetings. When Lykomedes returned home after months in the barracks, the air of the hearth seemed strangely soft. The scent of bread and oil clung to the walls, so unlike the dust and sweat of the training grounds. He entered with his shield still strapped across his arm, his back straighter than before, his eyes older. Neaira rose to greet him, though her face remained composed. Spartan mothers did not rush forward with tears or embraces. Instead, she looked him over as though inspecting a warrior returned from battle. "You are taller," she said, "and your scars are well earned." Only when she touched his cheek briefly, like a whisper of tenderness, did Lykomedes allow himself to breathe as her son again. Damaris, seated nearby, studied him with a mixture of pride and sorrow. He was not the boy who had left. He had become something harder, sharper. Yet when their eyes met, brother and sister shared the same unspoken vow: we endure together. Later that week, Damaris was summoned to meet her betrothed. She entered the courtyard where he waited, a man already weathered by campaigns, his cloak faded, his arms corded with muscle. His gaze was steady, not unkind, but it weighed her. "You are Damaris," he said simply. "I am," she replied, her voice clear though her heart raced. He studied her, as though judging whether she would bear sons with the same endurance as warriors bore shields. "You are strong," he said at last. "That is good. Sparta does not need beauty. Sparta needs strength." The words struck her oddly. They were not cruel, but they reduced her to function. She clenched her hands at her side and lifted her chin. "Strength I have," she said. When she returned home, Neaira asked nothing, but Damaris spoke anyway. "He does not see me as I am, only as what I must become." Neaira's eyes softened. "That is marriage in Sparta. You will grow to see him not as a lover, but as a companion in duty. Together you will serve the state." Damaris swallowed hard. "And if I cannot?" Her mother's reply was firm, though her voice carried sorrow. "Then you will endure anyway. That is what we do." That evening, Lykomedes sat with his sister beneath the fading light. Neither spoke of their burdens, his of the battlefield awaiting, hers of the marriage approaching, but both felt the bond between them burn brighter for it. Theirs was not the freedom of choice, but the freedom of endurance. Cast out and bound in. In the yard of the agōgē, Lykomedes stood shoulder to shoulder with his comrades, the dust swirling around their legs as the instructor's voice cut like a blade. "Sparta has no place for the weak." At first, he thought it another lesson, another test of endurance. But then a boy was brought forward, a frail youth, limping, his shield too heavy for his thin arms. The instructor struck the shield from his grasp, and it clattered to the earth with a hollow sound. The boy pleaded, "I can learn, I can grow stronger." The instructor's reply was a swift kick that sent him sprawling. "Sparta has no time for those who beg." The words were final. Two older boys dragged him away, his cries fading into silence. Lykomedes' stomach churned, bow rising in his throat. He wanted to shout, to defy, to argue that courage could grow in the frailest heart. But he held his tongue. To speak would mark him as weak too. His hands clenched around his shield until his knuckles turned white. He told himself it was not cruelty, but necessity. Yet, in the stillness of night, when all the boys lay asleep, he heard the echo of the expelled boy's voice and wondered if Sparta demanded too much. Far from the barracks, Damaris's own fate was being sealed. Her wedding approached, and with it the rituals that would strip her of girlhood. She bathed once more in the Eurotas, her hair unbound, while the older women circled her with chants. They rubbed her skin with oil, braided her hair tightly, and dressed her in simple garments that marked her as a bride. One whispered in her ear, "Tonight you leave the hearth of your mother. You will be stolen from it, as tradition demands, and carried to the bed of your husband. Do not resist. To struggle is shameful. To endure is honor." Damaris's heart pounded, but her face remained calm, carved from the same stone as her mother's. When she returned home, Neaira embraced her, not openly, but with a hand that lingered on her shoulder longer than usual. "You will be taken tonight," Neaira said quietly. "It will feel like loss. It is loss." But it is also the way of Sparta. Remember, you are not alone. Every woman before you has endured the same. That night, as shadows lengthened, the ritual was carried out. Men came in silence, lifted Damaris from her mother's hearth, and bore her into the night. She did not cry out. She did not struggle. She remembered her brother in the yard, standing silent as another boy was cast away. Both of them, in different ways, had been witnesses to the ruthless demands of their city. And as Lykomedes lay awake under the stars, haunted by the cries of the boy Sparta rejected, Damaris lay in her new home, staring at the rafters, her body trembling with the weight of what had been taken, and what was now demanded. Blood on the hands. The morning sun burned low across the hills as Lykomedes and his group were led into the wilderness for a different trial, the hunt. But this time, there would be no rabbits, no small prey. The instructor's voice was grim. You are Spartans now. A Spartan takes life without hesitation. Today you will draw blood that matters. They stalked through brush and stone until the shadow of a wild boar loomed ahead, its tusks glinting, its breath steaming in the cool air. The beast pawed the ground, snorting, a living wall of muscle and rage. Fear shivered down Lykomedes' spine, but he gripped his spear tighter. The older boy beside him hesitated. That heartbeat of doubt was all it took. The boy charged. The group scattered, cries erupting as tusks slashed the earth. Lykomedes lunged, spear quivering in his hand, and drove it forward. The shaft shuddered, biting deep into the beast's flank. The boar roared, thrashing, and blood spattered across his arms. The others closed in, spears stabbing, shouts echoing. At last the beast collapsed, its body heaving one final breath. Silence fell, broken only by the rush of blood in Lykomedes' ears. He stared at his hands slick with the creature's life. He had killed. The instructor's gaze was steady. You have crossed the line. A Spartan cannot hesitate when blood must be spilled. That night, Lykomedes lay awake beneath the stars, the metallic scent of blood still clinging to him. He thought of the boy cast out, of the boar's final cry. Sparta demanded strength, but strength was bought at a cost. Elsewhere, Damaris faced her own threshold. The ritual abduction had brought her to her husband's house. The chamber was sparse, the air heavy with expectation. Her husband entered, his movements slow, his face unreadable. He did not speak at first, only studied her, as though she were another duty laid upon his shoulders. Fear twisted in her stomach, but she remembered her mother's words, endurance is honor. When he touched her, she willed her body not to flinch, not to cry out. She clenched her teeth, steady as stone. The night passed, a blur of fear, pain, and silence. By dawn, she lay staring at the rafters, her body aching, her spirit raw. She did not feel triumphant, nor broken, only changed. She had crossed the threshold no less than her brother had in the wilderness. When Neaira saw her daughter again days later, she searched her face but asked no questions. Instead, she placed a hand on Damaris's arm and said, "You are a Spartan woman now. You have endured what was required." Damaris nodded, though her eyes were distant. Inside, she whispered to herself the same vow Lykomedes whispered after his hunt, "I will endure." And though neither knew the other's trials in full, brother and sister walked the same path, bloodied, burdened, but unbroken. Becoming what Sparta demands. The assembly yard was alive with firelight and the steady beat of drums. Lykomedes and the others stood in a line, their cloaks ragged, their bodies marked with scars and bruises earned over years of the agōgē. Tonight, they were no longer boys. Tonight, they would be named among the young warriors of Sparta. The elders stepped forward, their eyes sharp as blades. One by one, they inspected the youths, asking questions of law, testing memory of song, striking them without warning to see if they flinched. When they reached Lykomedes, the eldest among them studied the thin but steady frame of the boy. "Your body is not the largest," the elder said, his voice like gravel, "but I see no fear in your eyes. Tell me, what is the greatest shame for a Spartan?" Lykomedes lifted his chin. "To return without my shield." The elder's lips twitched, the barest ghost of approval. He lifted a crimson cloak and draped it over Lykomedes' shoulders. "Then you are ready to march among us." The drums quickened, the voices of warriors rose in song, and for the first time, Lykomedes felt the pride of belonging fully to Sparta's brotherhood. But deep within, a flicker of unease remained. He had endured, but he had also hardened. And he wondered what had been lost in that becoming. Far from the firelight, Damaris sat in the quiet of her new home, her hand resting lightly against her belly. The missed cycles, the faint sickness each morning, there was little doubt. She was with child. When she told her mother, Neaira's face betrayed no shock, only the faintest tremor of relief. "Then your duty begins," she said softly. "You will bring forth Sparta's strength." Damaris nodded, but fear tightened her chest. She had seen childbirth in the temple, seen how it could bleed life from even the strongest of women. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "And if I do not survive it?" Neaira's voice was steady, though her eyes glistened in the firelight. "Then you will die as bravely as any warrior on the field. That is the fate of us all." Damaris swallowed hard, but then she placed her palm firmly against her stomach and whispered, "Then I will fight." Two siblings, one draped in the crimson cloak of a warrior, the other carrying the hidden fire of new life. Both had stepped deeper into the roles carved for them by Sparta. Both bore the weight of survival in different forms. And both whispered the same vow into the silence of night: "I will endure." The march and the birth. The dawn sky was pale as Lykomedes donned his bronze greaves, leather straps biting into sun-hardened skin. His shield rested heavy against his arm, his spear poised, his cloak fluttering in the chill wind. Today, he would march beyond Sparta's gates for the first time as a full-fledged soldier, shoulder to shoulder with men who had once been his instructors. The city hummed behind him, walls solid, citizens bustling. But he did not look back. His heart thudded with anticipation and fear. Each step was a drumbeat of destiny. The older soldiers fell in beside him, their eyes sharp, their stance unyielding. Lykomedes mirrored them, stiff and careful at first, then with the rhythm of practice and endurance. Meanwhile, within the quiet home, Damaris lay on the low bed of her husband's house, sweat beading her forehead. The pangs of childbirth gripped her body in cruel waves. Her hands dug into the rough blanket, nails leaving marks on the linen, her breath sharp as if stolen from her lungs. Neaira knelt beside her, her hands steady but her eyes wide with silent fear. "Breathe, child," Neaira whispered, though her own chest ached. "Endure as Sparta taught you." Damaris gritted her teeth, her body writhing against the pain, the room echoing with her cries and the rhythm of the pounding heartbeats outside the door, soldiers ready, as always, for the city's demands. She felt the life within her push, stretch, and insist upon existence. And with a final, screaming effort, she expelled the child into the world. A boy's cry split the air. Neaira's hands shook as she held the newborn, the tiny body slick with life. "A Spartan," she whispered, tears escaping down her cheeks. "Born of endurance. Strong and alive." Far on the march, Lykomedes could not hear the cry, could not see the struggle, but he felt the invisible bond tug between him and home. Somewhere, his sister fought as he had fought, his mother's silent prayers guiding them both. As the soldiers pressed on, Lykomedes glanced at the rising sun, the tips of spears catching light, and whispered into the wind, "I will endure." And Damaris, exhausted but triumphant, held her son to her chest and whispered the same. I will endure. Neaira, standing in the doorway of the hut, watched both children, one distant, one near, and whispered a prayer that the city which demanded so much would not take them from her before they had fully lived. In Sparta, survival was a legacy, endurance a gift, and blood, the sweat of warriors, the pain of women, was the language in which the city's story was written. Lykomedes and Damaris, bound by family and by fate, had learned its cruelest lessons. And still, they endured. The sun climbed higher. The city waited. And the two, in their separate worlds, continued to live as Sparta demanded, unbroken, steadfast, eternal. The story of Lykomedes, Damaris, and Neaira closes here, though their legacy, as Spartan children, warriors, and women, would ripple through the generations, carved in bronze, whispered in blood, and remembered in silence.